The agenda this week looked at the International Criminal Court, talked about efforts to improve diversity in the legal profession, and debated academic freedom. The agenda's week in review begins with assessing Canada's new national housing strategy.
Let me just unveil this fact file here and bring everybody up to scratch on some of the highlights of this just announced national housing strategy, because it will involve investing $40 billion over 10 years, as we suggested, nearly $16 billion to create 10,000 new affordable housing units, $4 billion for what's called a new Canada Housing Benefit, $2.2 billion to reduce homelessness, providing funds to repair nearly 250,000 existing affordable housing units, $300 million in additional funding for housing needs in Canada's north, and, most interestingly, declaring housing a fundamental right. All right, let's get some feedback on this. Michelle, start us off here. Initial reaction.
Well, Steve, a lot of people are saying that this is a historic moment, and I believe that indeed it is. The federal government has taken a very big step, and I think they've introduced 3 game changers. One is they've added an gender equity lens to all public policy, so considering everything from the lens of gender. They've introduced a portable housing benefit right across the country.
So you get it wherever you live.
You can get it wherever you live, dealing with the core housing need, as you pointed out at the top of the show, and the introduction of housing as a fundamental right, I think is a really important step.
More on all of those as we go along. Jacqueline, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I agree with Michelle. This is definitely a positive set of announcements. I think what's also true is there aren't a lot of details yet. The details on the homelessness strategy, for instance, has not yet been released on the Indigenous housing strategy. So I am excited about the directions it's going, but I'm also in a little bit of wait and see mode. I want to see what's going to happen, particularly around homelessness, and also see where the government intends to go with the Indigenous housing strategy.
Quay Mackenzie.
Well, I and Wellesley, we're interested in health. And a housing crisis is a health crisis. And we are in the middle of a housing crisis at the moment. And it's a severe crisis. So I feel that the government is going in the right direction, but it is much, much, much too little. And it's going to take too long. And I think that in the meantime, people will die. And that's my worry about this. I think they're going in the right direction, but there's so much to do. There's a great need, and I think this is not enough, and it's too slow.
You would like to see more urgency?
Yeah, much more urgency.
Paul Kershaw, your take.
I actually agree with that last sentiment, and I would say that the National Housing Strategy in its current form is doing a decent amount to reinvest the federal government's leadership into addressing social housing and trying to tackle some of the shameless amounts of homelessness we have in this country. But the plan fails because it fails to recognize that even if we were to double the amount of social housing we have in this country, still 9 in 10 Canadians would rely on the market to provide them access to suitable homes at a price point that's in reach for what they earn. And there's very little talk in the National Housing Strategy about how outdated, old-fashioned policies are interfering with supply and inviting harmful kinds of demand that are driving prices of homes for renters and prospective owners out of reach for what they're earning.
Greg, your initial analysis.
The strategy is a major step forward, but it falls short of being transformative. It reinforces, it puts the federal government in a lead in a strategic way. It reinforces a cost-shared system of the federal and provincial and other governments. It provides some certainty for several years, hopefully for 10 years, and it makes, as was mentioned, one big policy move with the new Canada Housing Benefit.
Let's follow up with you, Greg, because we pointed out off the top that the federal government has kind of been out of the social housing building business for a long time. How much housing did the federal government provide to meet the needs of Canadians when it was previously active on this file?
There's 2 parts to the answer. The first is that there is a system of about 500,000 social housing units that exists and was built, you know, mostly sort of 20 to 50 years ago. And that does receive some federal money to help keep it affordable. In terms of production, though, if we look at the 1970s and 80s, about just under 20,000 units a year of social housing was being built, so nonprofit, cooperative, and public housing. And under the new strategy, we're looking at, 6,000 to 10,000, somewhere in that range each year.
Quam, we just saw a graph which had a couple of lines on it, one showing much more significant building long time ago, much less in more recent years. There it is again. Public, nonprofit, co-op housing is the blue line, and that line is much bigger than the post-1996 new affordable rental units. And as you look at the last, almost 20 years right now, with the exception of a couple of blips, not much at all. Tell us what the actual impact on the ground is of what that graph says.
So we look at those graphs and we see that there's not a lot of new affordable housing. And when people are thinking about health and they're thinking about housing, they're usually thinking about homelessness, and they say, right, okay, we know that people who are homeless don't live as long. What people don't realise is that poor housing also has an impact on health. And so when we start thinking about it, we start thinking, oh yeah, of course, mould, infestation and infections, or just poor repair, and then we're into accidents. But one of the other problems that happens because of that, because of the cost of housing, is that people have less money. So if you're spending maybe 70% of your income on housing, then you've got financial pressures and stress and finances, and anxiety in general decreases your life expectancy. But also, if you're spending 70% of your money on housing, then you may not be able to spend it on food. And at this time of year, we're seeing more and more people going to food banks because they can't afford food, and they can't afford medicines, and they can't afford to pay to do some exercise. They just can't afford the basics of life.
Assuming the court has a long life ahead of it, where would you put it right now in terms of its maturation?
So I think that we're past the young infancy, where the court was basically growing up and finding its way, and perhaps you could label it as kind of tumultuous teenage years, where it is trying things, being reproached for this and that, and trying to acquire an identity that will be formed and accepted by those around him, or it.
Kamari, an interesting metaphor there, a tumultuous teenager right now. Do you agree with that?
No, I don't. I would remain in the infancy stage. I think that there are a lot of structural issues in relation to the ICC, and African states have certainly put forward recommendations for reform. So certainly not teenage years yet, but like one would expect of any early institution that's struggling to establish itself, the court has a long way to go.
A long way to go, but so far, Valerie, I wonder if you could share with us what you think its most significant achievement to date has been.
I'm in the camp of Renee in that I think that the court is in its teenage years, and because of that, it has gone through a period where it had some challenges with prosecutions. It had some challenges with figuring out how to properly make its own process work. But now the prosecutions are in the hands of Fatou Bensouda, the current prosecutor. She is doing a very solid job. She has shown that she's entirely independent. She has led some successful prosecutions, including of some high-level officials, and I think that that set a really solid basis for the ICC going forward.
Where is she from?
She's from the Gambia.
From the Gambia, an African nation, and has that done anything in your judgment to quell the criticisms of those from Africa who think that this court unfairly targets African nations?
I think it did when she was first elected to the position. She has done her best to explain from her point of view that the court is not targeting Africa. However, it wasn't enough to stop her own country from announcing its withdrawal last year. Now, in the end, it did not withdraw, but the very fact of where she's from didn't seem to have any sway over that building momentum towards withdrawal. Since
you, I actually was going to get to this a little later, but since you've raised it now, let's get into this now, because the East African nation of Burundi is now, I believe, the first country to leave the ICC. Let's bring that map, there we go, we'll bring a map up, just show everybody where Burundi is. Kamari, can you help us understand why Burundi decided to leave the ICC?
Well, the court initiated investigations, and this was in response to significant violence in the capital and in the surrounding regions, violence that led to death, and there's been significant pushback, and the Burundian government went through the standard procedure and announced its intention to withdraw.
And Renee, in your view, how significant a problem to the ICC's existence is the fact that Burundi now wants to leave?
Oh, I think it's an extremely serious turn of event, and we should not underestimate the significance of this because, you know, Burundi is not the biggest country in the world or something like that. I think that's it challenges a certain sense that there was no turning back, that we had rejected impunity forever, and that the international community was realizing the promise made at Nuremberg so many years ago that never again would the international community stand by and do nothing in the face of atrocity. What we have to pay close attention to today is how the international community is reacting to Burundi's withdrawal, whether Burundi is made to pay a hefty political price for walking away from what's presented as a centerpiece of international relations today. And I'm not sure that we are seeing Burundi being made to pay such a price. And other countries are watching and will take their cue from how events unfold around the Burundi withdrawal.
Kamari, follow up on that if you would. Do you see an effort by other countries to punish Burundi for its move?
Well, it's not clear yet. It's only been a couple of weeks since this has been effective. It's not clear yet, but one thing that is clear is that there are important alignments on the African continent, those that are that have governments that are pro-ICC, and those that are clearly and vocally anti-ICC. And this is playing out in quite complex and complicated ways. But withdrawal, as we've seen historically, withdrawal from international treaties sometimes has economic and political implications. And so many of us are watching closely to see how things will play out in that regard.
Rocco, we haven't heard from you yet. Let's hear from you on this. Your reaction to what the Law Society is attempting.
Well, I was speaking with, well, I was asking Julian earlier as a vice chair of the working group. You can't disagree with what the Law Society is trying to accomplish here. I mean, no human being in your right mind in the modern day could say, I'm opposed to promoting anti-discrimination. I'm opposed to not being racist. It's
so
not.
In spirit, you're with them.
Naturally, that's who I am as a black male in this society. What I asked Julian was, what does it mean to comply? What does it mean? Because I think what's contemplated in the years to come would be compliance audits. And what will be happening is the Law Society, by some criteria, will walk into a law firm and see whether or not you are complying with the spirit and letter of what is being suggested.
Do you have a problem with that?
I don't. But what is the basis of compliance? Does it mean then that I have to say, for example, if you have, as Catherine has pointed out, a law firm where it's majority white men, do I have to go out and seek a black man to be in compliance? Are we, in a sense, legislating associations in that respect? Are we making employment decisions in that respect? And I could see where constitutionally some would have a question about that, as it has been challenged by Professor Alfred, I believe, up north. The Law Society is well within its right, it's well within its authority to legislate it. I think the Constitution contemplates it. Section 15, subsection 2 of the Charter of Rights allows for the Law Society to institute programs if it deems it ameliorative of conditions for historically disadvantaged peoples. And I don't think anyone would disagree that the history of relations between cultures in this country has had some groups suffer historical disadvantage. But so what we want to flesh out is particulars. It seems too vague. You read, for example, in your own guidelines, immediately that it somehow undercuts the potency of what they're trying to achieve. It says the requirement does not create any obligation to profess any belief or to seek or to persuade anyone about anything. But that's precisely what we're trying to do. It says don't be racist, right? And then you have the requirement will be satisfied by licensees acknowledging your obligation to take reasonable steps to cease or avoid conduct that creates and or maintains barriers for racialized licensees or other equality-seeking groups, which I think flows from a recognition that the status quo as it currently is restrictive. It's limiting. There's a reason why you find Royland and I as sole practitioners.
Well, I was going to ask that because you two are sole practitioners. You two are not with what you'd call, what do they call them, the Seven Sisters or something like that? The biggest.
I used to be.
But you used to be.
Sole practitioner too. Yeah.
You're sole practitioner as well.
I had my own firm.
Is that a coincidence?
No.
No.
It's not a coincidence.
No, I think the Law Society has propounded on this on a number of reports, saying, and in a number of fact-finding studies have suggested that quote-unquote racialized licensees, and I do disagree with that term, racialized.
Okay, you've raised a fascinating issue there about compliance, and I want to get Julian on that. Okay. If, for example, the future Law Society of Ontario deems a significant law firm in this province not to be in compliance with the spirit or the attempt of what you're trying to achieve here, what remedy do you see being applied?
Well, first of all, let's be careful about what we're talking about. We're right now talking about the requirement of the Statement of Principles. There's other requirements that are going to kick in. There's 13 recommendations. There's data collection in respect of firms of 10 or more licensees, then inclusion data that's going to have to be provided by firms of 25 or more licensees. So this is only the beginning in terms of proactive steps, and I want to be clear about that. And it's one of the reasons it's so important that this discussion happen now, so that it doesn't happen as we inch along. There was a decision of convocation, which is the group of the board of directors of the regulator, to pass this entire package of reforms together. In that vein and in that spirit, like any other rule of the Law Society, ultimately there has to be a compliance plan, and there is. And to answer Rocco's question directly, for the first 2 years, the emphasis will be on education. It will be on education, and it will be on cautions in respect of those who aren't able to comply or are not complying.
So just understanding how that works, somebody from the Law Society would go to firm X and say, you're not really in compliance right now, and what?
And I want to emphasize what that looks like so that we're not artificial about this. Mm-hmm. What that looks like is this is combined with a CPD requirement.
CPD?
In other words, professional development. So in other words, we also have a cultural competence requirement of training now that is going to be mandatory courses on issues around cultural competence. So this education emphasis is in the first 2 years because this is new, it's groundbreaking in terms of any other law society in the country, and so we're going to help our members, our licensees, understand what's expected of them. After 2 years, we will basically learn from the 2-year experience and initiate what we call progressive compliance. So like any other rule at the Law Society, we're a regulator. I mean,
progressive compliance means what?
Progressive compliance means you go up the ladder. And when you go up the ladder, it starts with warnings. And if you're unable, and remember, it's not about us checking out the contents of a statement of principles. There's a box required on your reports. Like other, you should know, there's a whole series of declarations you have to make as a lawyer, starting, by the way, with the oath to the Queen. Just saying, it's very interesting that the detractors and objectors today are not present at the calls to the bar saying that there's something wrong with declaring your oath to the Queen. I mean, if you want to talk belief system, I can't think of something more fundamental. We're talking here about conduct.
I think we're sidestepping the issue. The issue is really one about the role the university has played in helping to produce the very kinds of oppressions that many of us teach and research right now. The university is deeply implicated in producing certain kinds of logics of white supremacy. And if we don't grapple with that, then we can't actually begin to grapple with the claims that people who have been consistently oppressed and shut out, now entering into the university, are making claims on that institution to better respond to them. This is what this is fundamentally about. But also, I would say to you, Steve, that what happens is, it's not from women's studies and black studies that these kinds of things emerge from. It's usually from white male scholars, by the majority, often making claims about things for which they have no expertise in. And then we find the entire institution coming into place to support their right to speech. It's fundamentally a problem.
Let's take your argument seriously and engage and say, if there are scholars in the university who have no expertise, as you claim, who are speaking and writing about things which they are not really qualified to speak about, it's precisely when there's free debate and academic freedom that kind of shoddy work is exposed. And that's where I want to agree with what it is.
The marketplace of free ideas has not consistently worked for non-white people. We should be honest about that.
Well, I think we're again, there's a confusion here. I think you call it marketplace, and I don't. I call it an agora, which is a different thing, but an open public square, not a marketplace, an open public square of free debate, not only for faculty members, where academic freedom has been, but for students. Students also have to feel free to say things that may be unpopular, may be unconventional, may be risky.
But not illegal.
No, of course not illegal, right?
100 years ago, we had marketplaces and agoras where people debated other people's humanity as well. Right now, what we do is in classrooms, we have people debating whether or not trans identities are viable identities.
But that's how universities evolve, and that's how they improve.
Exactly, and they evolve by also saying that some things are intolerable. What is the fear of saying that some forms of speech are intolerable in a world where we already have limits on speech? We've seen it happen in the university around BDS. We've seen it happen around Israeli apartheid. We've seen the university in many skillful kinds of ways limit speech.
Let me jump in here with this and get you to comment on it.
But they have.
Stand by, everybody. Here's Michael Coren has been on a bit of a journey over the last several years of his life. He wrote in the Toronto Star just the other day, "I wonder how young, vulnerable trans students are feeling right now. I've been sent numerous emails from trans kids and their supporters about the current situation that are heartbreaking, but I've not seen much coverage of this." Shannon, I wanted to ask you about some of the media coverage of this because I think it has overwhelmingly been, oh my goodness, look how our campuses have become paragons of political correctness and we have no more free expression and we're all going to hell in a handcart. What do you think's happening on the other side?
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, I've been really concerned about the general effacement of discussion of trans and non-binary students in the media and public discussion about all of this. The reason that the Peterson video was contentious at all was because of the worry that it puts already vulnerable students in a more vulnerable position, right? Now we're kind of doubling down by leaving them out of the discussion and treating them as kind of fungible. Like really, it's all about free speech. It doesn't matter who the persons are who are involved.
But let me go back to Janice's original point, which is to say, are you denying those students an opportunity to develop resiliency skills by, as some would say, infantilizing them?
Trans students are more resilient than anyone you have ever met because they have dealt with a lifetime of oppression and stigma. This notion that they need to be introduced to Jordan Peterson's views in a classroom so that they know what the world is like out there is so ridiculously naive.
It's so argument. That's actually not the argument that
the argument that the TA is making.
Yeah, but that's actually not the argument. Certainly trans students have a great deal of experience, too much, with those kinds of arguments and have heard them. The argument is that Jordan Peterson, whatever you think of his expertise, he is a faculty member who has the right to academic freedom, and that trans students are capable of dealing with that argument in a sophisticated way. And so it's actually, to me, that's the core of the argument, as you just said. They're stronger than we think, and therefore it is possible to have a debate As long as they're in the room, they have the opportunity to speak, and everybody recognizes that.
You come back on this, and then I'm going to throw to a clip.
I just want to notice again that one of the things that keeps coming up is this notion of the importance of debate. A debate is just one means of learning. It's just one means of communicating ideas, and it's a pretty agonistic approach as well. When we're dealing with ideas relating to people's historical and current lived oppressions, it seems to me that there are a lot of other communicative and pedagogical mechanisms available to us besides debates that don't then set up a polarization and tend to oversimplify.
Okay, let me jump in.
It must be clear that it's morally and ethically bankrupt, to put this in as harsh terms as I can, to debate other people's humanity. If we can't begin there, then there's something fundamentally wrong with the university as an institution.
That is the Agenda's Week in Review for this Friday, December 1st, 2017. You can catch up on all those stories at tvo.org, on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/theagenda. And thanks to our nightly Twitter live stream on our Periscope page at periscope.tv/theagenda.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit tvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.